Hi, Kate. Richard
Hi,
here.
Richard.
Nice to see you. Thanks very much for joining today. Just to let everybody know, the panel today, or rather the session today, is going to be talking about kind of the future of retail and how we've been faring for the last few months, and then also how we're anticipating the coming months and years. So, just as a very quick introduction, I'll just explain that I'm the CEO of WebGains. We're an affiliate marketing network based in Europe, and we have a very helpful view on how retail works on a purely digital side of things. We've seen some interesting happenings this year so far, positives and negatives. But what we thought we'd do is invite a real specialist who has a good view on all parts of retail, not just on online, and then we can share some of your wisdom and information on those kinds of things. So do you just want to give us two minutes or so on your background, Kate?
Yes, thanks, Richard. Yes, I've been in the industry for over 20 years, starting off actually as trend forecasters for retail, brand, hospitality. But as the world changed and our focus changed, I guess you would say we became more business futurists. So we work now still in retail, brand, hospitality, still in global innovation, still work with very big brands around the world. But I would say we're now much more consultative, solving very specific and actually very difficult problems these days, now that retail has become rocket science. So yes, I spend my time immersed in, I guess you would say, the cutting edge of all kinds of consumer facing innovation in retail, brand and hospitality. So one day I might be looking at the semiotics of things that you wear against your skin. And the next day we might be looking at store of the future for a sports brand. So extremely broad. But the upside of that is, it's cross category, it's international, speaking to a lot of boards, obviously absorb a lot of information from all those clients you're working with. And of course, everything's aggregated, but it means that we get, I think, quite a good big picture of that sort of global drift of where we're going. And we're lucky enough to have been invited to every year for the last few years to convey that big picture to the NRF, for example, world's biggest retail organization, to give them a trend keynote. So basically, it's my job to know what's happening in retail.
Fantastic. Well, good. Well, thanks very much for joining us. And also, one of the other things we might touch on today is people's careers. So people who are working in these industries, which are the ones that have a good future, and also in those where the direction of travel for their careers may be. I mean, this whole session is called Transform, or rather, the event's called Transform, and it's about transforming your business, your personality, your families, all the things that you can do in order to be agile and intelligent enough for the next few years, which are very difficult to predict. I mean, just bringing that point to the front, if we think about what happened in 2020 so far, clearly nobody was expecting what was going to happen from the early stages of Q1. I mean, most of us were bumbling on nicely, doing the same things. And then, of course, we had this kind of explosive that happened into the world, and it's affected so many people in so many different ways. Some parts of retail have really suffered. Some other parts of retail have been fantastic. We've seen some really positive stories alongside negative stories, but mainly where people are really focused on digital only, or they really knew what they were doing and they had the capacity to deal with extra demand, or they were in a position where they didn't need lots of frontline staff out in the field, sort of driving things. So I'd be interested to hear your views about how prepared everybody was, and then what happened over the last few months, and then whether there's going to be some real winners and losers long term. A lot of companies are going to be able to weather this and then come back strongly, but others are just casualties. Plus, there may be a new set of leaders as a result. I mean, what's your view on all this?
Yes, as I say, we deal with boards a lot, and I don't think there's a single one that had this really at the top of their agenda or even anywhere on their horizon. Nobody, even though governments knew that this was likely to happen in the next few years, I don't think big corporates were prepared. There were no chief resilience officers then, and I think there will be in the future. you know, the supply chain was long and complex. We all know that, you know, how many dozens of different countries have to, you know, supply products for an Apple iPhone, for example. I mean, dozens and dozens. So I just don't think anyone had this any idea that this could happen. So it has fundamentally changed everybody's perception. And you know, we have to put our hand up as well. As futurists, we were not, I'm afraid, recommending that people were prepared for this. Although, you know, there was obviously a very serious and big problem in retail before, and I'm sure all of us in the industry know that 2019 was the worst year for retail in the UK ever, or since it began for the last 30 years. So things were already pretty broken, to be honest. And we have been saying for many years, well, yes, this needs a very radical overhaul. And I'm afraid some big shifts are coming, fourth industrial revolution and all that. You know, jobs are going to go, artificial intelligence is going to move in, a lot of white collar workers are not going to be needed. You know, we need to wake up to this. And I think people, you know, most retailers were definitely along the path of, you know, optimizing for that post-channel economy that they did know was coming. And everyone has been moving towards that sort of omni-channel, post-channel set of customer experiences, because, you know, there's not a retailer on the planet now that is not, I'm sure, aware that we now buy things in a sort of snackable fashion. You know, we snack on retail multiple times during the day, usually when we're doing something else. We don't have a purposeful trip to our favorite shop anymore. I mean, that was a previous era that, unfortunately, I personally think it is unfortunate, because I think that was rather charming, but that is gone. So we have to let go of what's gone and, you know, get with the program. So I think this calamity, as it has been for all of our lives and economies, and, you know, obviously the worst, I suspect, is yet to come economically, has been the wake-up call that actually I think will be that tipping point for the winners and the losers. And I think we're already seeing the winners come out well. I mean, let's face it, and not just, you know, the digital, but also the well-positioned omnichannel retailers are already, you know, doing fantastically well. And so, you know, there is an optimistic future. It just will be different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was a bit agnostic when it came to online retail. I like going to a place and just trying something, and before I commit my money to anything, and that's really changed now. And I was happy to open Amazon or whatever it was on my phone and just make orders. It did tend to be around what I needed rather than what I wanted. My wanted purchases seem to have disappeared for just needs. So it's like things like screws for the DIY, and a new barbecue for the food because we were eating in the garden, and all those kind of things, which I suppose there is that shift in from needs to wants. Maybe those wants will come back. And if you look at travel, for example, clearly there's always an innate human desire to travel and explore, which I don't think is going to go away. So but obviously with the quarantine problems at the moment, that's turned into a super last minute thing, dash over, dash back, and do what you can. It's very interesting on those kinds of things. I guess my question on that would be, there are some laggards. There are the ones that haven't made it so far, that may not make it through. I mean, that could be a big problem for the country, right?
Yes, and I think we're already at 12% of store vacancies in the UK, and that was in March. So obviously that's going to get a lot worse, and probably is already a lot worse.
Yeah.
So I think we were at 14% during the 2008 crisis. So I would predict that we'll be quite a bit worse than that. So yes, the laggards, I think, are going to suffer quite severely, and many of them will not be with us in a year's time. And I think we probably, without mentioning any names, can all guess at who those will be. They're basically the ones that are not much fun, not very exciting to go to, not great selection, not great customer service, not very available online. You can't get the staff heart within half an hour at home if you don't actually want to go to the store.
Yeah.
You know, we know the types, and they are, you know, in many cases, say if you were in China and you were a mom and pop store, and you had a limited selection, and quite a lot of the product was dusty, and it wasn't very well kind of attuned to the local population. That was the old world. And then Alibaba comes in and kind of offers many of those, tens of thousands of those mom and pop stores an offer they can't refuse, which is enter into our platform, have our suppliers provide you with a highly optimized set of products that is perfectly attuned to what the people in your local district are searching for, because we know what they're searching for because we're Alibaba, and we know what they're paying for because we have the payment systems, and we'll supply it to you super quick from our warehouses, and you'll have a whole new revamped, modern, inventory optimized store, and your turnover is going to increase by 30% overnight.
Yeah.
Well, that's modern retail for you, and that's the way it's going. So it's about inventory connected to the local population, connected to what people are searching for, what people are buying. And obviously Nike's cracked this. I mean, I know that they've got a jump start, but they were thinking about this a long time ago with their 100 million people downloading their app to become a member of that club. Well, funnily enough, they've started using the data from that app, and each of their stores, whether they be flagship or sort of local store, and very cleverly they've got very different types of stores for very different types of location, and each store is perfectly optimized to the exact nature of the interests of the population in that location. And
Yes.
every store is something that you physically wear. You walk in, and because of your app and its history of all your searching and all the rest of it, it says hello to you, it knows you, it knows your previous purchases, it allows you to call an assistant or reserve an item. You just walk in and get it from the locker if you're a bit shy and don't want to talk to anyone, or you can join a workshop or join a run, and it knows that that city is a runner's city and another city is a yoga city, and it optimizes the store for the people. Now, they've cracked it, and this is the future. And so therefore, every store is going to have to become something that you almost wear as a digital kind of jacket as you walk in. And then its digital jacket walks with you everywhere else you go because it's in your pocket, and you can have anything from that store within half an hour as long as you live within a 3-kilometer distance. So this is what we've already got in China and in various other locations, US in particular, and across Asia. And it's coming to everywhere else. But I would say Asia is ahead. US and Europe are sort of catching up.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, one person's omni-channel experience is another person's data protection nightmare. And I've been to China, I've been to Shenzhen, Beijing, and I've seen it in action, and it blows your mind. And it's a lovely experience when it works. And of course, I suppose if you're in a dystopian opposite of that, if you were trying to get away from it and just living a simple life, it's pretty difficult to do so. On the other hand, it does give a vision of the kind of things that could be available to be cherry picked or to be optimized, or those kind of things in the European and the westernized society, because clearly we have much more of a say on our personal activities. Are there any more examples of the kind of things that you can see in China that we might be able to use to advantage over here?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many examples in China. I do think both JD.com and Alibaba are doing an amazing job, particularly in grocery. So if you look, for example, at JD.com's 7Fresh, which is one chain or one sort of set of supermarkets, or 7Fun, which is a different one segmented to kind of urban environments. 7Fun is amazing. I mean, it's a small supermarket. You can buy your milk and all your fresh produce as usual, but it's also got 12 restaurants and 3 bars and constant kind of happenings every night, where it's part kind of live music, part sommelier kind of activities, workshops for food. It's like going to somebody's kind of home and having a party, stroke going to a posh hotel and going to the bar, stroke going to the restaurant. I mean, it is pure entertainment. And we've seen hints of that elsewhere in Europe. I mean, I think Waitrose had a bit of a jazz bar thing going on in King's Cross at one point. So we've seen hints of it, but they have absolutely cracked it. And obviously, as is the case with Chinese retail, anything you scan, you can have just sort of sent home within the half hour. You don't necessarily have to go there and lug stuff home. So they've cracked the idea of store as experiential space, but also as logistics hub. So in all of their supermarkets, they've got, you know, pickers constantly doing the shopping for people who are, you know, expecting it to arrive home. And it's not just the raw ingredients. That could be, you know, the cooked food, the raw food that you'll cook at home, the separate ingredients, you know, absolutely in any possible configuration that you can imagine buying stuff, they've catered for that, and everything can be done obviously through the app. Now, I do take your point about the privacy issue, and I'm a big privacy advocate, and I would not want personally to be recognised everywhere I went. I don't want to pay by face. Personally, I like my face to be relatively unrecognized.
Yeah.
But as you said, once you've kind of experienced that fabulousness and entertainment value and fantastic kind of customer experience and service, you think we've got to take the best bits of that and bring them here, but in ways that do protect people's privacy and GDPR and all of that. And, you know, there are good goes at making that work where you take the best, but you leave the total surveillance capitalism bit. And we're seeing that, of course, with the Amazon Go. So Amazon Go rolling out already. We've got other brands which are just using their own version of that. There's an independent set of supermarkets in Ohio that's just launching their own version, I think called Giant Eagle. And they're not using Amazon's white label technology. They're doing it their own way. But, you know, that's seamless. You walk in, you do your shopping, you walk out, you don't have to pay anyone. That is the future, let's face it, particularly in a COVID and post-COVID world where you can get relatively low touch, fast and seamless, but also entertainment with your shopping. That's the holy grail.
Yes, I mean, there's some data that you sent before this interview, and it was saying about retail and hospitality businesses are at serious risk of failure. And KPMG did a study that says the high street could shrink by 25% in 2022, which is, you know, fairly alarming. And obviously the first person to people to worry about this are going to be the retail store owners and the property investment companies. They've got to quickly switch. They've got to work out how to use their real estate. And I think what you're saying is if you create these communities in the way that the Chinese or some of the Far Eastern or Eastern economies have done, you're almost walking into a physical walled garden where you almost sign your privacy away at the door, but in exchange you get the experiential space. I mean, I've got two late teenage daughters, and they would love this kind of thing. Whereas personally thinking I would run a mile from it. So I suppose it's a generational thing, and it's a what you're used to idea. They share their personal lives literally with abandon, whereas the last thing I'm going to do is take a picture of my face and show it to my friends. How long do you think it might take to move from this world to the world you can foresee?
I think it's happening at lightning speed, and we're already seeing it. So I would say within 5 years, you've either fallen away or you've gotten with the program. Probably 3, in truth. If this was not already in the planning, then that most big ships are probably going to fail to turn around if they weren't already 3/4 of the way there, which they should have been, because it's not as though this has crept up all of a sudden, in the sense that we've all known for a long time that the world was moving towards greater preponderance of digital. I mean, I think we were at about 18% was e-commerce in the UK pre-COVID. Then it went up to about 32% during lockdown, and now we've gone back down to about 28%. So KPMG reckon will be 50% e-commerce by 2025, which they say they think is about 5 years earlier than anticipated as a result of the pandemic crisis. So, you know, we were heading this direction. It's just happened quicker. So
that's huge.
It's a huge, big juggernaut to turn around for big organizations. And that's why a lot of the smaller businesses are nimbler and quicker. And, you know, we can all learn a lot actually from the DNVBs, the digitally native vertically integrated brands, who were already kind of getting it right with probably starting online and then moving into physical retail once they'd established themselves. But they had that tone of voice, you know, they were sort of very good usually at the logistics and the delivery and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot that the big existing brands can learn from those small, nimble, digital first entities.
Yeah, super interesting. We certainly see that with our portfolio. We have many single item pure plays online, and they've done fantastically well because they're distributing through obviously affiliates. They're distributing through the search engines using CSS, Google product searches, and it seems to be that people are moving away from the retail brands to more the product brands, where you like a particular type of Nike trainer, but you're not bothered about the t-shirts, or it could be a book about skiing, but you're not wanting to buy the skis from Snow and Rock and things like that. So it's all about a multiplicity of different things that brands seem to be able to sell through product distributions, rather than saying, right, well, I'm in a store, I'm going to browse the shops and I'm going to buy the best 10 things I can find. It seems to have become much more efficient to distribute your SKUs or your inventory than it has been ever before. Certainly through the product searches on Google, Bing, and the other guys. And then we can see that through the stock markets. I mean, the stock markets are doing pretty well based on FANGs, based on sort of 5 to 10 businesses in the US, basically. That's the Western markets. And yet you're still hearing these terrible stories about people being let go from traditional retailers, and it does feel like a big transformation. So if you're working in any of these businesses, obviously, one of the things about this series of programs is to say, how can you be ready for this? What do you need to do for yourself? How can you transform if you need to? What advice would you give to somebody at any stage of your career? If you're a kind of seasoned guy like me, or actually in my position, but in a retailer, but all the way down to somebody that goes to work at 9 to 5 and is worried about their jobs or in their furlough. What would be the advice to somebody to say, actually get ready for this? It's coming. You're either in it or not.
Well, obviously, it's got to be to make sure that you maintain your digital skills and that you understand how the physical world now must fully interact continuously with the digital world. So if you're in a physical store kind of type of employment, then I would strongly recommend that you learn about and immerse yourself in the opportunities for things like live streaming from the store, for concierge retailing, for using things like, the Hero app is one that lots of people are adopting around the world. And, it's a platform that allows you to have text conversations, video conversations from the store, if you're the associate, to the customer who might be in a totally different country or time zone. Think about sweating the assets of that physical store. I mean, if most people are browsing the internet in the evenings after work between 8 p.m. and midnight, then why is the store shut at that time? Stores are going to become broadcast studios. You need to sweat those assets. Physical space is expensive and unjustifiable if you're not using it for multiple purposes. I mean, it should be, breakfast in the morning, cafes during the day, cocktails in the evening, and in the late evening, it needs to be a live streaming studio where you've got your most energetic and knowledgeable and charismatic store associates talking to people on the other side of the world and selling them stuff and broadcasting not necessarily just to one person, but potentially to thousands of people. I mean, this is what stores have to become. They can't just be somewhere that sits there and waits for people to walk past. I mean, that just feels so incredibly old, doesn't it? It feels so passive. That's just not going to cut it anymore. So I would say digital skills, digital marketing skills, understanding how to optimize the inventory to the season, the time of day, the weather, the local population. I mean, footfall analysis and all those data analytics. I mean, basically, best user of data wins. I mean, everyone's got loads of data. The problem is knowing what to do with it and how to use it. So if you are looking to future-proof your career, but you don't fancy becoming a data analyst, because obviously that's not everyone's tea, then I would suggest think about, your communication skills as they pertain online, or your knowledge of influencers and how you can engage with them, how you can provide them the best kinds of collateral and content and inspiration so that they will talk about your brand, which is obviously very close to your world. So, it's it's about that full intersection between the physical and the digital, with more emphasis as you go forward on the digital, obviously.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And now we mentioned the influencers and the bloggers and everybody else who at the moment is very early on in that world where they are external and they're picking up these things that they like to talk about, and they've got a lifestyle that drives followers, and it drives sort of social equity. And I guess what you're saying is that those influences could be brought internal to the organisations and through an authentic experience. So the guys that at the moment sitting there waiting for the footfall and waiting for people to come in could actually become the face and mouthpiece, if they were the right people and with the right training, to represent the brands and their products, rather than at the moment we've got the slight there's some friction issues between the ability to pay somebody for an influence, because then you have to declare it as an advertiser, as opposed to somebody that works for the company and it's well known. I mean, I think you obviously something like the B&Q adverts you see on TV, it's the guys working in the store saying, "Hey, I work here, it's great, and this is my kind of lifestyle, and I'm going to help you." I suppose it's a digital extension of that kind of thing. That could be quite interesting to look forward.
And we're seeing it with Taobao in China, where they've now got physical stores that are selling the top 100 products from their website. So they change every week or so based on what's reached the top of the popularity list online. But now they have kind of live streaming studios in those physical stores. Now that's for store associates, for customers, for more professional influencers, and they're running it sort of 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. because that's when people are online at home. And we're starting to see actually something interesting in terms of dark stores, which is kind of new, I think, in the sense that I must admit I hadn't even heard about dark stores until quite recently. Yes, dark restaurants, obviously lots of those. But we've seen Gucci, for example, open a dark store in Florence in Italy. So it's a physical store, no customer will ever enter. It's just optimized for beautiful lighting, product merchandised in a very kind of expensive way, as you'd imagine, for Gucci. And of course, great camera angles. All the associates are themselves fantastic, communicators, just talking about the products. It's a live streaming space. So I think we'll see more of that, both with actual physical built stores, which could be obviously on an industrial estate, very inexpensive for rates, although hopefully that's going to be sorted out soon. But also digital versions of stores as well. They are actually now getting pretty good and pretty exciting with things like just augmented reality. So we had Lego last year, for example, had a pop-up store, and there was nothing in it, just a white space with a snap code. And basically that just took you into an augmented reality Lego store with Lego characters walking around, looking like sort of whole sort of full-size people. I mean, you couldn't do that in a real space. You have to do that digitally. And I think, there's huge opportunity for both real, virtual, augmented spaces that people kind of inhabit. And then within that space, you would have, hopefully, I personally prefer the real version, but obviously increasingly also the CGI version of influencers who are, waxing lyrical about the product. But I agree with you. I think if it is an employee of the company, in some respects, even better, because as you say, that's an uncomplicated transaction. Nobody's hiding anything in that instance.
Wow. I mean, it's almost like television comes off the TV sales and into the stores. That a conversation and a convergence between that, and then yes, the virtual influencers. I follow a few, and like Lil Michaela, and they've got millions and millions of followers. Everyone knows they're the robot, but they still keep an eye on it. They still see how the perfect version of a Gucci or a Dolce & Gabbana type garment could be. And again, my children, I mean, they look at this stuff and they are influenced by it. So it's scary for the likes of me, born 20, 30 years before them, and very conservative in my shopping and buying habits. But it certainly seems to be the way things are going. But no, this is the idea of a dark store. I mean, dark kitchens, I guess what you're talking about is where you have the Deliveroo and the Just Eat, and there's no physical manifestation. They're literally doing kitchens for delivery. And I suppose you're saying the same for dark stores, which is very interesting, because I've studied when I was back in university about dark spaces in stores like IKEA and everywhere else where you're disorientated and it makes you buy. I suppose it's kind of a step on from that, really. It's you get sucked into something, you like it, there's an affinity, you buy it, you share it with your friends, and then you're happy and you go on to the next one. It's super interesting. I mean, you can obviously buy things like cars, £100,000 cars now using virtual showrooms, and people are doing that. And but I guess it's how to get to there from where you are right now. So if you're very particularly, let's say you're a regional retailer, you don't have the mass and the ability to transform. If you've got 400, 500 shops, there's a few things you can do. If you've got 5 or 6 warehouses locally, how can you quickly transform, and how can the staff quickly transform? Some of whom may have been there 20 years. That's a difficult transformation.
I mean, it's interesting for us that Shopify is now turning over more than eBay.
Wow.
So that's getting a lot of small and often independent vendors online. And the equivalent in China, the Taobao Live, we thought it was very interesting that in February, I think it was during lockdown for China, they had 715% increase in sign-ups of first-time vendor users. And a lot of those were farmers using that platform for the first time to sell, veggies that would otherwise have gone off. And, farmers, presumably with very little training, there's probably some training from Taobao, I'd imagine, online, but, they must be pretty raw and pretty sort of rough-edged. But actually,
That's
my
what people
understanding
like.
is,
Yeah.
Gen Z really
Yeah.
love the run. They don't
Yeah.
want.
Yeah.
And so you've got hundreds of thousands of farmers selling, their produce on Taobao Live, and then you've got people in car showrooms selling their cars as well. So it's all sorts of different kinds of products and services could be sold through these new platforms. I know those platforms can, in some cases, cannibalize pre-existing retail. But I think actually in the case of Alibaba, they claim that they're actually supporting retailers because they're providing those kind of services to facilitate both, the marketing, the sales, the payment, the delivery, the logistics, and the postal, all of that, for small vendors that would not otherwise be able to cope with all of that. So I think whether it's Alibaba or some other configuration of service, like DPD or whoever it is, courier services, there are so many plugins now that smaller retailers can basically just not have to reinvent the wheel for themselves. They partner with a startup or an existing service, and it's fairly easy to put all these things together, whether it's through Shopify that does it all for you anyway, or you put it together yourself independently.
Or an affiliate marketing network as well.
It's a huge advantage now, the fact that small entities can have huge clout, especially if they, as you would know better than anyone, manage to get noticed by an influential person or a celebrity, someone that's got a big, kind of range, talks about their product, they're up and running.
It's certainly something that we noticed, and in the evolution and transformation of web games over the last few years, I remember having this conversation saying, what are we actually selling? How many things do we sell? And somebody said, well, we've got about a couple of thousand retailers, and I'm like, no, how many things are we selling? How many SKUs, individual items? And it was in the millions. And then I said, well, how many things could be sold? And it was in the multiple millions. I think there's 25 million, maybe even 30 million individual products in our database that we can push through all of our affiliates. And we've almost transformed our business to say, actually, that's the thing the affiliates should be promoting, rather than it's a retailer online and they've got 50 products. We're saying, look, there's a fire hose here of 26 million things, and you can put them through your own systems. And then you'll see that actually some of this long tail stuff that you might not sell very much of is very profitable but it's been sitting in a dusty corner for years. And now all of a sudden you can surface that. I mean, a good example would be seeds and flowers at the beginning of the lockdown. All of a sudden, people were buying all sorts of random seeds for vegetables and flowers, and even growing their own wheat. That kind of prepper mentality. The world is over, we have to survive. And this stuff has never sold before. And all of a sudden, you set it free, you democratize it through some of these new marketplaces, and hey presto, you have these new winners that you never have known before, because you've almost like you've released them into the wild, to use a fun phrase. And then who knew that seed companies or lawnmowers or paddling pool suppliers or all these kind of single-use things would have been so successful? So it's been a fantastic 6 months for us in terms of learning. But then what you're saying is there's a whole nother level of step change people have to anticipate, whether they're running those businesses or working for those businesses, that it's a good idea to keep abreast of.
Yes, and I think we were, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything that's happening was already happening before, it's just happening faster. And so there was already a huge growth in conversational commerce, is one of the phrases for it.
Yes, yes. I worked in 1999, I worked in online community marketing, and the whole thing hasn't changed. It's about building social equity and all those kind of things. Yeah, conversational commerce is very powerful.
Yeah, and peer-to-peer platforms, which young girls advertising makeup from a particular brand to other young girls and then getting paid for it. And then there's one particular brand that we covered recently called it's called My Beauty Brand, and it's solely selling online through a peer-to-peer platform. So if you actually sell the highest bracket, not only do you get commission on what you're selling, but you're also getting shares in the company.
Yeah, well, that's the Avon model and the Herbalife model. I mean, that's been going for. Yeah. I mean, Tupperware was born by that. So yeah, I mean, it's just changed and transformed into a digital-only version, and very powerful.
But it tunes into a big meta trend of, sadly, what we're calling the loneliness economy, which has been perhaps driven and is more advanced in Asia, where there's been a lot of dislocation as people move into cities very quickly and work in tech and so on. They work very long hours, or work in manufacturing. They're working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. They haven't got time for partners, or they don't hook up with people in the way that young people manage to do in the West. And so they're lonely. And so for them, online shopping and online conversations and live streaming chat, that's their human connection. So it was growing already anyway, and now it's growing with all of those tech advances where you've got very realistic looking avatars, or you've got personal assistants that are very personalized to you, and they're your shopping assistant, and then also your companion stroke, in some cases seemingly girlfriend. So it is a brave new world out there, and at the outer edges I personally do find it a little bit scary. I think, as you do, people of our generation don't quite get all of that sort of almost quite cynical stuff that's going on, where you think, what's real and what's not real, and therefore what's authentic and what's true, and is there something dangerous in that? And I personally think there is. But nonetheless, I think we can take the best of each of these cutting edge areas and sort of draw it back and say, look, this is a solid thing that we should invest in. We need to learn about it. We need to take the best of it. Because essentially, I think what it comes down to is retail is becoming more entertainment. It's merging with entertainment media. And if it's not fun, funny, educational, experiential, fast, seamless, efficient, it's basically not going to survive.
Yeah.
So the best things, the things that are the most fun in the world, and say, how does that apply then to a supermarket? So you have in Singapore a supermarket called Red Mart now does cooking shows on Facebook Live, which is free. A lot of these things are much cheaper than they used to be. And all the thousands or millions of watchers at home can order the exact items through the live stream that the chefs are cooking in real time. Top 25 get the benefit of having it delivered home to them for free as a ready-to-go meal, and that's the promotional thing. And then everyone else can just buy the raw ingredients, and then they cook along at home. Yeah, and it arrives within half an hour. So this is a combination of cooking school, it's YouTube, although it's on Facebook Live, it's entertainment, it's food and culinary. I mean, that's where it's all going. Whether it's fashion or in any other sector, it's got to be extremely experiential, and it's probably better in truth if it's merged or mixed in some way with an entertaining media kind of IP or activity. Let's face it, that is just the direction that we're going in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a like you're saying, an anxiety-inducing future. I mean, obviously, people like moving around. I mean, there's the physicality of these things, and you're saying you're right. I mean, the loneliness factor when you're sitting at home, and we've seen this with even some of our own staff. They're stuck at home, they're working in the bedroom. It's very unpleasant, and you can sometimes get that, serotonin buzz from making those purchases. Waiting for them to come. It gives you an alternative, but clearly things like physical exercise down, walking around shops and up one end to the other of Oxford Street. I know it isn't designed to be a physical activity, but you take it away and it doesn't help with the anxiety level. So it's worrying in the sense that it's just going to force ourselves to be in one place, and to the end of convenience first.
Yes,
it makes it worry. We're kind of in that Wall-E situation where you've got people riding around on trucks and pressing buttons and things get poured in their mouths, and is that really the future that we want?
Well, I'm a bit more optimistic than that. I think that the independent high street will come back with a vengeance, actually. I see a very positive future for local high streets, particularly where they've cracked the independent retailer issue. And obviously that requires new approaches by local authorities, government, taxation, rent, rates, all the rest of it. But I think we have got sort of indications that there is an understanding of the direction we need to move in for that to happen. And I think that in the lockdown, there was great loyalty generated for the independents that kept going and kept the communities going. A lot of small corner stores were the only place you could actually nip in for a pint of milk and not have to queue for an hour, especially in London for a supermarket. So I think all the research shows that most people are saying that they will be more loyal and more supportive of their local independents post-COVID. And, they have everything that we want. There was a problem, there is a problem in this country for clone high streets of everywhere looking the same. Now, a lot of those chains have been very challenged and will shrink. And actually, that's for the better, in truth. We are overshopped in this country. We don't need as much retail as we have. It pains me that people will lose their jobs as a result of that. But structurally, that was going to happen always. And we need less because obviously we're going to be buying half online. But what will remain will be the hub of the community. It won't just be retail, it'll be education and theatre and bar, restaurant, and all the other things that create human community. And I'm actually a big fan of the Grimsey reviews that Bill Grimsey, ex-CEO of Iceland and so on, has written over the last few years. And I think he's getting everything absolutely right. He says, look, town centres will not just be about retail in the future. We just have to accept it. There needs to be more residential. Shrink the retail down to the core, let it go in the tertiary areas. We need more residential anyway. We need more green space. We need less dependence on sort of car-based cities. And it needs to be locally driven, so much more empowerment for local communities. And that includes things like rent and rates. So I think there is a future, and I think it just needs some smart manoeuvring now from national and local governments to make that happen.
Wow, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation in itself. And I think that the next few years are going to be so super interesting from November onwards, with changes to the furlough scheme, changes to the mortgage support schemes. We're in for a very interesting time, I think, for the end of the year and then beginning of next year. But I agree with you completely. Some of this stuff is irreversible. The connections you're making with your local communities will always be there. I mean, it's super interesting. I think we've kind of come towards the end of our session, but just three things. If you're in the world, if you're employed in this business, or generally the three things you've got to think about just to prepare and keep ready and relevant to this new world that's coming.
Okay, well, according to the latest research that's come out of the National Retail Federation in the US, in combination with IBM, they have identified essentially most shoppers dividing fairly equally between two groups. 41% are driven by value and convenience. So within that category, I would say that's logistics, efficiency, visibility of inventory at all points throughout the supply chain, availability of product through this kind of snacking type behavior. And all of those kind of make it work, get the basics right of retail. So that's 41%. And 40% of the consumers surveyed, and this is the surpriser, are driven in their shopping by ethics and values and sustainability. Now that's much bigger than it ever used to be. So I would suggest that the other area, apart from making all the logistics work and getting the omnichannel bit right, the other part is fully understanding and optimizing the sustainability questions of everything to do with your operation. So that's the supply chain, the way people are treated in, employment, the way the brand is responding to, the issues of the day, like Black Lives Matter. Are they truly representing their customer base at board level and all of those kinds of issues? Because if you don't get those right, then basically millennials and Gen Z, who are basically the future, won't buy from you. So make sure that you are up to speed as an individual professional on one or other, or preferably both of those areas, I would suggest.
Wow, amazing. I'm looking forward to replaying this this session, because there's so much great advice in from what you've said. Thank you so much. It's been super interesting. I could talk to you for hours, and obviously nobody knows exactly what's going to go on, but that's a fantastic steer in terms of some of the things we're seeing around the world, and applying it to our own markets. And certainly from what we're seeing, we can see the early stages of those things happening from WebGain's point of view through our affiliate network. So I would just want to say thank you so much. It's been so interesting. I really want to stay in touch, and we'll carry on these conversations, and hopefully you can help guide WebGains and our advertisers and affiliates through the next pretty turbulent times. So yeah, thanks very much, Kate, and it's been great. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.